What's up, everybody? This is Alex Christoforou with the Duran, and I'm here with Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. And today we're going to be talking about the Paris summit. Okay, Alexander, all the world leaders were in Paris to celebrate, to pay homage to the end of World War I. And the most notable, I guess, meetings, the meetings that got the most press were the meeting between Macron and Trump and how the two men interacted with each other. And Trump just arrived back to the US and he fired off 3 tweets, which I will read in succession, and you can comment on Trump's tweets after that, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So
absolutely.
All right, great. So the first tweet, these are 3 consecutive tweets. Just returned from France where much was accomplished in my meetings with world leaders. Never easy bringing up the fact that the US must be treated fairly, which it hasn't, on both military and trade. We pay for large portions of other countries' military protection. Hundreds of billions of dollars for the great privilege of losing hundreds of billions of dollars with these same countries on trade. I told them that this situation cannot continue. It is, and always has been, ridiculously unfair to the United States. Massive amounts of money spent on protecting other countries, and we get nothing but trade deficits and losses. It is time that these very rich countries either pay the United States for its great military protection or protect themselves, and trade must be free and fair. All right, Alexander, what's your take on these tweets from Trump?
Right. Well, first of all, that is classic Trump policy. He's been hammering away at the fact that the Europeans basically live off the US. They don't spend on defense. They get the US to protect them against Russia, or so they say, because really there isn't any threat from Russia. And at the same time, they use that to trade with the US, to their advantage, to run up big surpluses with the US, to get access to the US domestic market. And Trump feels that this is total exploitation. He said that many times, and he's just said it again. I mean, in a sense, that isn't new. But what is important about these statements that he's made, these tweets, is that they came after what was, by every measure, an absolutely disastrous celebration, if you can call it a celebration, of the end of World War I in France. Because Emmanuel Macron, the French president, completely misunderstood Trump. He made some extraordinary comments about a European army, about nationalism being the cause of war, about things like that, which were almost calculated to offend Trump. And at the same time, he did this bizarre thing of preventing Trump and Vladimir Putin of Russia, the 2 most powerful men in the Western Hemisphere, from actually having meaningful discussions with each other. So Putin left the celebrations in Paris bored and angry, and Trump has left them absolutely incandescent with anger. And these tweets are Donald Trump very angry with his Western allies.
Would you say that Macron, given the way he was elected, given the way he kind of came, I don't want to say from nothing, because he was in Hollande's ministry and his cabinet, as you would say, but would you say that Macron is very much a globalist, I guess for lack of a better word, because nothing comes to mind, something may come into your mind, a globalist puppet, in other words, or an elitist puppet? He was placed as president of France in order to be a caretaker of the globalist ideology and the ambitions, including the EU army, including a United States of Europe, and all those plans that they put forth, many years ago, and that were kind of falling apart?
I do think that, and by the way, I'm on record as having written this. If you go back to my articles about the French presidential election, which brought Macron to power, I made exactly that point about this. I mean, the man who was by all standard and logical measures, the obvious candidate for President of France, the person who was attracting the most support, was Fillon. Fillon, who had been the former prime minister and in previous French conservative governments, who was a friend of Putin's, who is known to be critical of sanctions, and would have been a perfect foil and partner to Donald Trump. So Fillon was brought down by an entirely concocted scandal around expenses and his wife's expenses of a kind that French politicians engage in all the time. I mean, there was absolutely no substance to it that was in any way different from what other French politicians do. And Macron was then leveraged into the presidency by positioning him as the democratic, liberal alternative to Marine Le Pen and the National Front, who were, of course, represented by the French media and by the French establishment as fascists. May I say straight away, Marine Le Pen is many things. She is absolutely not a fascist, not by any standard definition of that phrase. So there is no doubt at all that was the most controlled and manipulated French presidential election I have ever come across. I have seen this. I have seen many French presidential elections. I've never seen anything quite like this. And there is no doubt at all that Macron was put into the presidency for precisely the reason that you said. He is the standard bearer in France of the neoliberal integrationist EU globalist project. Both Marine Le Pen on the right and Jean-Luc Mélenchon on the left and Pierre Fillon from the centre-right were in different ways opposed to it. And each of them was sidelined so that Macron could be brought in and could run the presidency and could take the leadership of France, even though he was never actually personally popular with the French people.
Yeah, he strikes me as a very comedic kind of character.
Absolutely.
Very clownish.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Not a very intelligent man and not a very strong leader in any measurable sense.
You've described him absolutely correctly. He is not actually a very clever man. He believes himself to be, which is what makes him, I think, in some ways clownish in exactly the way you say. He doesn't understand sometimes the nature of what he is doing, and he doesn't understand also that the tide in Europe is running against him, or at least against the ideas that he represents, and that the tide in France is running against the idea he represents. And he comes to the presidency, he's brought to the French presidency, an incredibly undignified, I can almost call it megalomania. I mean, he compared himself to Jupiter, he lectured Putin on Russian history, telling Putin what Peter the Great once did, which, went down extremely badly with Putin. And now he's done exactly the same thing with Donald Trump, basically insulting Donald Trump by making these frankly phony distinctions between nationalism and patriotism, which, first of all, it wasn't the right time or place to do it. But anyway, Macron doesn't have the knowledge and the intelligence to make that kind of argument well. And, of course, he's also losing support within France itself, where people are becoming increasingly exasperated with him. So I'm afraid he is, if possible, an even worse and weaker leader than François Hollande. And that is saying quite a lot, actually.
That is saying quite a lot. But going back to that speech, there are many people in the French media who are trying to excuse away the speech, and I think they're trying to cover for Macron, saying that it wasn't really a dig at Trump. Macron was kind of taking a dig at Le Pen and at a lot of the left and the right. To be fair, it wasn't just the right, the left and the right. And he was saying the nationalist. He took that nationalist tone, that defiant tone against nationalism. in order to solidify his own position as a centrist. Do you buy into that, or do you really think it was a stupid, and I mean a very stupid, dig at Trump and the United States?
I don't have any doubt that it was a very stupid dig at Trump and at the United States. I mean, all these rationalizations and excuses that have been made since are just that. They are rationalizations and excuses. I mean, Macron may be, as I said, nowhere near as clever as he thinks he is, but he is certainly well informed enough to know that making those kind of comments in front of the President of the United States was almost calculated to, was calculated to cause the greatest possible degree of offense to the United States and to Donald Trump personally. And there is one thing which, to my mind, puts the question entirely beyond doubt. And that is the way that Macron did everything he possibly could within his power to keep Putin and Trump away from each other, even to the point of positioning them at opposite ends of the dining room table. I mean, that really, again, will have caused enormous offense to these two presidents, who, frankly, must have felt, who is this French president trying to get in the way of us speaking to each other? So I have no doubt that Macron did knew exactly what he was doing. I also have no doubt at all that Macron did not anticipate the reaction from Donald Trump that he got, and that these articles that we're now seeing in the French media and these comments which are appearing all over the place to try and excuse what he was saying are attempts by Macron, who at one time was trying to position himself as Donald Trump's friend, to try to repair some of the damage.
Yeah, I would say I can imagine what's going through Trump's head or Putin's head, kind of like, who's this little boy, trying to interfere in the work of men.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's exactly. It's like a child meddling in the work of the adults. I mean, and I mean, can I just say something? I mean, about this EU army that Macron was talking about. I mean, the Russians and the Americans must listen to that. I mean, everybody knows it is absolute nonsense. The idea that France and Germany and perhaps Britain, but Britain's, of course, supposedly leaving the EU, the idea that France and Germany can take on Russia by themselves is just silly. I mean, anybody who knows anything about the military balance in the world knows that it is the United States and the armed forces of the United States that make NATO real. I mean, if you take the United States out of the picture, there is no NATO, and Russia is far and away the most powerful military nation in Europe. And that's not going to change. So for Macron to be talking in this way shows how utterly detached from reality he is. And of course, the Americans and the Russians both know that. So, I mean, he's behaving in a stupid way, and in a way that they must find, the Russians and the Americans must find, beyond arrogant.
And I'm sure now that Merkel is obviously on her way out, sooner or later, whether it's 2021 or much sooner, Macron must be feeling very terrified at the fact that he's pretty much going to be all alone as one of these EU federalists, one of these. I'm trying to figure out the right words. Integrationists.
Call them integrationists. Yeah.
So he's going to be the last one, the only one that I can think of that's going to be standing.
Yes, you're absolutely right. He is, and of course, I mean, this is the consequence of manipulating a French presidential election in the way that the last one was manipulated, to put in an integrationist, an EU integrationist, and a globalist at the very time when integrationism is becoming discredited across the EU, and globalism is retreating. I mean, it's a massive condemnation of the French political establishment that they did this foolish thing at a time when they should have been preparing France for the changes in the international situation, which are coming. And you're absolutely right. I mean, with Merkel gone, he's essentially on his own. But, I mean, I think he is frightened of this. But, of course, he's also a man of extraordinary vanity. And I think he seems to think that he can actually take over from Merkel and lead the EU in her absence. And, I mean, that is equally fantastic and delusional, because there is absolutely no way that the Germans will accept that.
And so you've mentioned many times in previous videos about Trump's demeanor, that Trump is a man that does not forget easily when people wrong him. I want you to dig into it a little bit, what it must feel like to be sitting amongst all these world leaders. The United States president, the US president, comes to Paris. He's listening to the president of France speak, and the president of France is actually talking down to him in front of all of his peers and all these world leaders, from Putin to Theresa May to Merkel. Everyone is there. What is Trump thinking? What's your best estimation as to what's probably going through his mind?
Well, I think we've got a good idea of what's going through his mind from the tweets that you read right at the beginning of this program. He is, as I said, incandescent with anger. And he's saying, who are these people who we are protecting, who don't protect themselves, who are sponging off us by running massive surpluses with us? Who are these people to lecture us in that kind of way and to treat me, the elected president of my country, the United States, the world's most powerful country, the protector of Europe, supposedly? Who are these people to treat me like that? And, of course, one of the most interesting things about what happened in Paris is that though they were prevented from speaking to each other, the one person who went out of his way to treat Trump with courtesy was Vladimir Putin. I mean, you know, he gave him, what was it, a pat or a wink or something.
They smiled, and the mainstream media in the US went crazy. They went crazy
exactly
because they smiled.
Well, it did. They smiled at each other. But I mean, I think it was not obviously the two men plotting, because I mean that's a crazy idea. But I mean, it was basically Putin saying to Trump, "Look, I have to deal with these people all the time. Yeah. I know exactly what you're going through. You have all my sympathy." And I think that was essentially the message that was passing between them. And I think Trump will remember it.
That's an excellent observation. That's the exact same thing that I thought of, was Putin kind of telling Trump, I've been dealing with these children for years now. Don't worry, I know exactly what you're going through. And so what is the next step? Do you think that Trump has the power, has the guts, has the balls to actually follow through on what he was saying in those tweets and actually tell France, NATO, European countries, pay up or we're out?
Well, I think we now come back to where we were in one of our programs that we did very recently, which is what Donald Trump's position is following the US midterm elections. I mean, there have been attempts to try and argue against the theory that we expressed, the analysis that we made, which is that his position has actually been strengthened in the US. I continue to insist upon it. He is in strict control of the Senate. Irrespective of what happens in Florida and Arizona, the Democrats made some gains in the elections, which one is completely normal in midterms, and they're in control of the House of Representatives. But it is the Senate whose support Donald Trump needs in order to govern the United States. He's got it. He's got the Senate behind him. And it's a Senate that he did not have fully behind him before. I mean, if people want to understand that, I mean, our program is there and we discussed it. Now, I think that puts him in a very strong position going forward to start taking more action against the Europeans and to start cutting down on some of the relations that there have been between the Europeans and the US, the military bases and all that, and to reach out to the Russians. If that is what he wants to do, I think he will have the support in the Senate to start doing that if he moves that way. And knowing Donald Trump, I don't think he's ever given up on his wish to improve relations with Russia. So I think that, having listened to the way Macron and the Europeans treated him, I think that will increase his resolve to do precisely that at precisely the moment when he's beginning to feel stronger.
Very quickly, before we end the segment, Alexander, if Trump does decide to turn the screws on these integrationists, starting with Macron, which EU countries are going to side with Trump right away? Because I have no doubt that they're all going to side with Trump sooner or later. But which ones are the first ones to bail?
Well, you're absolutely correct. But Italy has already made it perfectly clear which side of the barricades it's on. I think Hungary will also. I think we'll start to see countries like Poland and Slovakia and the Czech Republic, they'll start to drift over as well. And to be frank, I think if we're talking about relations with Russia, much of Southern Europe would actually welcome a thaw in relations with Russia. The big holdouts will be France under Macron, because the French constitution makes it very difficult to change the government in France, at least while Macron is president. And of course, Germany is the great unknown. But I think you're right. In the end, the power of the United States is such, and the weakness of the Europeans is also such, because the Europeans have weakened themselves to an extraordinary degree over the last 15, 20 years, that in the end, they will all fall into line.
All right, Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran. Thank you very much. Guys, if you like this video, click on the subscribe button down below and click on the notifications bell to get notifications every time we push out a new video. And visit the Duran shop, pick up a t-shirt, help support the Duran. And in the description box down below, you'll find links to our PayPal and Patreon pages. Donate to the Duran. It really helps us out a lot. Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran. Thank you once again for taking a look at Trump and Macron at the Paris summit. Until next time, take care.